If you are thinking about buying a house in 2024 or indeed any time after 2024, I'm going to give you a number of tips today in this video which should give you a good idea, a good steer in what you can expect and some things to look out for. Now, I've asked my colleagues, because it's very, very easy for a person like myself to have certain ideas or tips in their head which you might always revert to as a sort of a default or as your number one tip, and I know what mine is. But I've asked my colleagues for their contribution. I have three colleagues here, Kira and Josephine and Jennifer, and they've all given me tips, their views as it were. I've asked them for a number of tips and they are excellent. So I'm going to give you, in no specific order, all of the tips from both myself and from my colleagues. So we'll start off here with the first one is, if you're getting a mortgage, make sure to have all your documentation in order. In other words, pay slips and whatever the requirement of the bank is, because obviously if you don't have finance in place, then the whole process of buying will be held up. And an approval in principle is all very well, but you need a specific offer in respect of a particular property, a particular purchase, because it's only when a specific offer is being made to you that the specific property that you're going to buy, etc., is referred to in the letter of offer, and the valuation and so on. It will be done on that property. So approval in principle is fine, but it only goes so far. So make sure you get your mortgage in place. Secondly, please note that the auctioneer works for the vendor. In other words, the vendor has the auctioneer acting for him or her, and the client of the auctioneer is the vendor. So be careful what information that you rely on, etc., etc. The auctioneer, quite frankly, won't know much about title or planning or any other issues. Will make certain representations, but you probably can't rely on them. Their job is to get a buyer and their client is the vendor, so bear that in mind. In other words, what they tell you, keep a certain deal of skepticism about you, and trust but verify. As I say, auctioneers, their job is to get a buyer, they act for the vendor, and they can't really make any statements or reliable statements to you or representations about title or about planning or that sort of thing. 3, get a structural survey done. Structural survey is absolutely vital if you're buying a second-hand house. You don't need structural survey for a new house, but you do need one for a second-hand house. You do buy the house in the condition that you find it, so it is very much a question of caveat emptor, let the buyer be aware. You must carry out your due diligence before you buy the property. Number 4, a converted attic is not necessarily habitable space or living space simply because it looks like that or because the auctioneer says that that's the case. There may well be a planning application required. There may well be a building regulation issue or concern there. So simply because an attic has been converted doesn't mean that it's lawfully habitable space. You will need, in all probability, planning permission for habitable space, and you will need building regulations to be adhered to and a certificate of compliance with planning and building regulations. So be careful about that. The attic may well be converted, but it may only be counted as storage space. And if that's the case, remember, if you're buying a 4-bedroom house, be careful whether the room in the attic is been considered as part of the purchase, as part of the valuation, because the valuation then may well only take into account the habitable space, in other words, say 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms, and exclude the room in the attic. That's something that needs to be clarified. Your solicitor will be able to clarify that for you though. Number 5, if you're purchasing a property from a receiver or indeed from a legal personal representative, in other words, somebody has passed away, there is a grant of probate to be applied for and obtained. That grant of probate is necessary in order for the vendor, the LP, or the legal personal representative, the executor, to sell the property. So that may well cause a significant delay depending on when the application has gone in. Nothing your purchasing solicitor can do about that, your solicitor, but it can cause a delay. Number 6, BidX1 Properties, online auctions. BidX1 Properties, by and large, they are for cash buyers, not borrowers, not mortgages, not banks advancing mortgages. They're not really suitable. They really do suit cash buyers. So BidX1 and other online auctions, you really need to be a cash buyer and be careful about that you don't go end up buying a property. You have perhaps approval in principle for a loan from a bank, and then you go and tell them you're after buying this thing at BidX1. They probably, in all probability, won't want to know. Now, the next bunch of tips. Familiarise yourself with the process. Understand what each party does. So you'll have an estate agent, you'll have a bank, you might have a mortgage broker, you'll have a solicitor. Everyone has a particular role to play and should really discharge their own responsibilities and duties. So it's useful for you as a purchaser to familiarise yourself with what they actually do. The next tip then, I think it is, let me just get the numbering right here now, because I'm on to Kira's tips now, and we had Josephine's tips. Let me just see. So Josephine gave me 6, excellent. And Kira now is giving us, so number 7 then was in relation to familiarising yourself with the process. Number 8, trust the conveyancing process. Both solicitors need the transaction to complete. Trust that they're working towards that. It's a process and takes time. Both solicitors will be working towards a successful conclusion to the transaction, and it's only when that happens that both solicitors are actually paid. So it's in their interest, clearly, for both solicitors to advance the process, etc. Don't go thinking that solicitors are downing tools or being very slow on purpose or to frustrate you or anything, because we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. We only get paid when the transaction is completed. So there may well be other reasons as to why the transaction perhaps is slow. Keep cool, don't be overly frustrated, and trust your solicitor. That's all I can say. In relation then to your lender, keep on top of your lender's requirements, loan conditions, etc. If there's no funds, if there's no loan, then there's no transaction going to be completed. So you will need, and you should read your loan offer, terms and conditions from the bank. Your solicitor can explain them to you as well, but it's no harm for you in advance, before going to the solicitor, to have a read through them, and if you have any questions, ask your solicitor. He or she will be able to explain them to you. But you need to be able to take responsibility yourself for your own part in the situation, in your own part in the process, and ensure that all of your paperwork is in order for the bank. And 2 things that will be required for the bank will be home insurance, life insurance. They need to be in place. If they're not in place, the bank will not release the funds. So they were Kira's tips. Now we're on to Jennifer. The vacant property refurbishment grant. Look at the length of the vacancy. If you're buying a property that has been vacant for some time, or indeed derelict, and you're thinking about getting the local authority or the grant for the vacant property or derelict property refurbishment, then make your inquiries, look at the length of the vacancy, and check that it is going to be suitable and eligible for the grant. So you will need to carry out your own due diligence to a certain extent. Your solicitor can make inquiries, but be careful about relying on what estate agents and so on say to you as well, because the only person who can really confirm, with some sort of a declaration or an affidavit, how long that property has been vacant would be the vendor. Next, plenty of time. Make sure you give yourself plenty of time, and landlords, you may well be renting a property, etc., etc. The conveyancing process can be slow enough. Sometimes it can go really, really quickly, but sometimes it can be slow. Frustrations can rise, and people can get very tetchy and very frustrated and anxious and so on. But it is a process that involves a significant investment. It involves professional reviewing of title, planning documents, title documents and so on, plenty other documents, local property tax, NPPR tax, etc., etc. There's a lot of checks to be done for the job to be done right. It can be slow enough, but you just need to be patient and sort of in your own mind, in your own mental space, allocate plenty of time for it. Patience, you need to be patient, understand that the process is or can be slow, contracts can be slow to return. There can be any number of reasons as to why one side or the other is perhaps appears to be slow, and then be wary as well of the blame game, one side blaming the other. As I say, the solicitors only get paid when the transaction is consummated and finalised and so on. So it's in our interest that the thing progress. But there may well be a delay, for example, getting a planning document or getting a certificate of compliance from an architect, or perhaps a grant of probate has to issue or whatever. There may well be a very valid reason. In relation then, and that most of those tips are applicable to second-hand houses, but in relation to new property, firstly, you can do some research yourself. Do your due diligence and look at the best mortgage rate. If applying for a mortgage, it's not necessary to have a broker. You can do it yourself, but a broker may well be useful for you. It's up to yourself. It's a personal call. Secondly, look for the grants, the supports that might be available to you. For example, Help to Buy, for example, the First Home Scheme. They are very, very useful, very popular schemes brought in by the government, and will help you get in the property ladder in relation to a new property, not second-hand new. So you have the First Home Scheme, you have the Help to Buy scheme. Look into those. There's plenty of information online. There's plenty of information on my website. There's plenty of information on my YouTube channel as well. And finally, in relation to doing your own research, etc., caveat emptor, look at the community, look at the area that you're buying in. There may be a new development, maybe a mature industry or factory next door that's involved, for example, in heavy, noisy manufacturing or something of that nature. There's nothing to stop you from doing your own bit of due diligence, perhaps at the weekend, and driving around, or during the week, because the factory could be closed at the weekend, and seeing what the situation is like. You know, is there any sites, for example, a dump or something of that nature, something that's unsatisfactory or might be disagreeable to you in the future, close by or whatever. You can find out an awful lot by travelling around an area, by spending a little bit of time in it, and by talking to neighbours and so on and so forth. Many people have bought a new house and they've been perfectly happy and so on, and delighted with it. But occasionally there is the occasion where a person buys a new house and then discovers that there's a factory or a business next door which has been carrying on business for years. They've planning permission, they're going to continue carrying on their business, and the noise coming from there may well cause you a great deal of discomfort in the enjoyment of your new home. Hope you find this video useful. If you do, I'd appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up down below, and you may be interested in subscribing to my YouTube channel. If you are, just hit the subscribe button down below. And if you're listening to this on my podcast, the Irish Law and Small Business podcast, which is available on Spotify, iTunes and elsewhere, then I'd appreciate if you left a review or followed me there or whatever. Thanks a lot.